Welcome back to Magus and the Media. It's been a few weeks since we last had our most beautiful live streams that we love doing. And it's finally time to return. And there's no better way to return to the desert of the real than to be going in deep, deep within the cave. What cave am I talking about? Well, it would be the cave of Plato, Plato's Allegory of the Cave. That is going to be what our evening is about. It's going to be also beautiful, so we can start to understand some very important topics in our day and age. These most important topics are just that. What do we see? Why do we see it? And what is being done about it? Thank you to everybody listening out there in this fine evening, January 28th, Wednesday, 2026. Is it truly that day today? No one will ever be able to tell you, because what is time in such a reality where we can't even know truly if what we're seeing, hearing, or feeling is ever truly real? So, this is what we're getting at today. What we're getting at today in this desert of the real is, again, Plato's cave. Hello to all, and I so appreciate everyone joining me for this fine evening. Make sure, if you like these kind of dialogues, the mythological, the philosophical, the storytelling, the trying to get at what is real in this ocean of chaos, please subscribe, like, and share, and we can continue doing this together. So let's go deep into it right away. And I'm gonna bring it up in this way. What is Plato's cave, and why do I feel like we're deep, deep within it? Well, it's really important to even just start off with who is the great Plato. The great Plato, right, is one of our fathers, the forefathers of Western philosophy and Western civilization as such. And we must understand first, where is he coming from? Plato is a gentleman in Athens, the great Greece, the ancient world of where most of our the underpinnings and the basic makeup of how we live in this day and age. Plato is the student of the great Socrates. Socrates of him and his great dialogues, the great dialectic, the man who was put to death for questioning a little too much. Where do we get to see that? Well, if you want to, you can please go over to the Apology by Plato. It's a dialogue where you get to see Socrates' last days. Socrates was a man, where they come from is around the 350 to 450 BC time frame in ancient Greece, in the old world. Why does this matter? Well, that is where everything was going on in our world. Today, it's happening, what we see and what we hear in America, maybe in Europe, obviously, and there are things going on in other places, but that day and age, the melting pot of the world, the ideas that were making everything that we know to be true, they were coming from just that. They were coming from ancient Greece. Plato, the student of Socrates, Socrates, the student of the great mysteries. What do I mean by that? Well, before we had Socrates, we had the pre-Socratics. I've talked about it before in live streams. The pre-Socratics were such minds as Anaxagoras, Anaximenes, and we get Thales. All these great thinkers thinking, what is the base makeup of nature and reality as such? Some of them thought it was air, others thought it was fire, like the great Heraclitus, and some thought it was water. Others had the idea that the world was made up of ether, interesting enough, taking from the Eastern world. Ether being the idea, the base makeup of all things being prana, chi, and the like, ki for some of you Dragon Ball fans out there. But what we get from the pre-Socratics is ether. And then some thought it was atoms and whatnot and so forth. But there was a great turn. The great turn from the pre-Socratic thinkers. And why were they called that? They were pre-Socratic because they were pre-Socrates. Strange. And we're going to get to why all of this matters throughout as we get to talking about what is going on in this desert of the real. So, pre-Socratic philosophers were thinking about what was the world made out of and how do we come into being, the cosmological understanding of the nature of our very existence. And before that, we had the mythological age of gods and how those gods really interacted with the world and the forces and the makeup of things, right? So what do we think about when we mean that? We get Homer and his Iliad and the Great Odyssey. Those works were stemming from the time periods of more around, Homer was writing in around 7 to 800 BC, and he was writing about the Great Trojan War. These things started, they thought, because of gods and Mount Olympus were having a great wager, the great wager of who was the fairest one of all. Who was the fairest one of all? Was it Athena, right? Or was it any of these lady gods in that time frame who were thinking of it? No, it was actually Helen of Troy. They asked Paris, who was the fairest one of all? This great apple of discord rolling into this party that Eris, the goddess of chaos, was not invited to, and she was upset. She was upset, and so she did just that, what Eris would do. She's all like, I'm going to cause a little bit of discord upon this party that I wasn't invited to, rolling the great apple, the golden apple of the Discordians, the golden apple of Eris. It said the Greek term Kallisti upon it. And what that means is to the fairest of them all. And so, just as happens at parties, they saw these ladies, these goddesses, saw these golden apples. And they were fighting about it. They wanted to know who was it? Who was the fairest of them all? And they were all like, we are going to pick the great Paris to be able to choose who is the fairest of them all. And then he didn't choose any of them. He chose Helen of Troy. And there we go. We get the great Trojan War, where we get to the battles of the Iliad, the great mythological understanding of going through the sun mystery schools of the hero. That is the esoteric reading of what the Iliad is getting at. You get Achilles fighting for Agamemnon as he's going up against Troy. And so you get all this great war, right? And that's not really what we're talking about today, but we can feel the makeup of this hero's journey and the great wars that have been echoing ever forth for quite some time now. Homer also wrote the Odyssey as Odysseus tries to find his way home to Penelope. Does he get there? He does in the end. However, he must go through every island and every aspect of the negative extremes of the initiation into magic and the moon, the initiation, the feminine pathway. Odysseus does make it. He goes through many trials on that way and he makes it home. He is the masculine, fully accepting and being able to merge that sacred great marriage to his feminine Penelope, and upon doing so, they live happily ever after. Why am I getting at this? The pre-Socratic philosophers, before then, was the age of mythology, and Socrates was speaking up against those things, as well as the pre-Socratic philosophers. We move away from mythology as being the underpinnings of our social order and our culture, and we move into a philosophic way of thinking, a way of thinking that I think has kind of taken a turn too far into the material world. Again, if anyone's out there and they're listening, please feel free to join in on this fine conversation. I move on. As we go upon these things, we must understand that Homer, first off, why this is important. Homer, a lot of people think, I think this, Homer was not one singular individual. Homer was an oral tradition. What's an oral tradition, you ask? An oral tradition is, think of the school of the bards. It's kind of like if you had a group of individuals trying to pass along an ancient tradition, an ancient cult, or an ancient pre-religious society, or a pagan understanding of how the world worked in that time frame. You would have it be passed on orally, because the written language maybe wasn't the best way to get knowledge across through time. And if it is only in an exoteric way. So we must have esoteric understandings of how human nature and the psyche work upon the world. Julian Jaynes, an author and a great thinker, had his great book, the Human Consciousness in the Bicameral Mind. That's not exactly the title. I can't think of it right now, but you can go look up Julian Jaynes's work. And he had this idea that in the Homeric novels and in those books and that oral tradition, that maybe we didn't have the corpus callosum to merge together the left and the right hemispheres of the brain. And upon doing so, we didn't quite understand exactly logically what the creative mind was trying to tell us. And so we thought the gods in the world were the forces, and these stories that we'd made up were the way the world worked. Was how we, when the wind blew or the thunder rained down or lightning or these great storms or the cyclical nature of how the earth goes through its seasons, these were gods that did these things. You know, Apollo made the sun rise and fall. Zeus was the reason for great major lightning storms upon other forces, these demigods that were created. You get Poseidon controlling the seas and the storms, just like as we hear about in Homer, when or in the Odyssey, when Odysseus is moving upon the thing, a great plight happened and Poseidon was upset. And so they got stranded in this great journey, the unconscious realms of the mind and magic. So goes the oral tradition. The oral tradition is there to pass along the secret teachings of the exoteric understanding of the forces of nature. My idea is that these people knew exactly what they were talking about. They had a tradition that was passing along ways for the human individual to go through initiation to be able to change their consciousness so they could have an anagogic experience, meaning an ascent into the divine realms. But you must pass that information along through storytelling. It's not that the wars of the Peloponnesian Wars, the Trojan Wars, they didn't happen, because they did, or so we think, and I think so. But the idea is that there were things that were happening, the age of the great heroes that were being passed along in this time frame. And what they were doing was they had to tell others, this is how you as a normal individual should learn these things. And if you could, you would hear these stories passed along through time. Homer's stories are just that. Homer is not a person, one man writing the Iliad and the Odyssey. Homer is an oral tradition that's passed along. Many individuals passing along a story. These stories, and through time, they had their massive significances on how humans understood the world, sort of like a religion. The oral tradition was its version of, say, the school of Harry Potter, the Bardic tradition, and many of the different ways for mystical and magical practices to be passed along to individuals if they understood the allegory and the analogy through time. So as we move along, there came a bunch of philosophers, again, in that area of the Near East, the upper, the Greek and Italy, and all these places upon those great bodies of water, the cradle of civilization. As they are coming along, and we get the pre-Socratic thinkers now trying to say maybe the gods, the stories of Zeus and Kronos, like the great fathers, maybe they weren't the reasons, the cosmological story for how humans came to be on this planet, how the planet came to be grown and born and discovered and grow. And so from those pre-Socratic thinkers, you get the great Socrates. Socrates came along at a time frame where he was trying to pass along a certain oral tradition that was made up, some philosophers and some academics think of, through the cults of Pythagoras and Orpheus. Orpheus being the story, the Orphic cults being the story of Orpheus and his lyre, going along, singing music and song, dance, and at the same time giving us that existential understanding, the phenomenological understanding, and the magical, mythological understanding of humans and their place in the great world. Orpheus, you should go look it up. He went under to Hades, to the underworld, to find his love. Eurydice. And what he had to do is all he had to do was have a little faith. I'll give you back your great love as long as you have a little faith. And as you're walking up from the underworld, as long as you do not look back at her, she will then be there with you as you cross through the threshold of what? It sounds like a cave. Huh. Interesting. As we move along in this understanding is of Orpheus. Why? Because Orpheus, the Orphic tradition and the teachings, the mythologies of Orpheus and his stories were one of the great lines that Socrates was initiated into. Of these thinkings of Plato, that Plato was initiated into, that these thinkers that were being taught in the time of Athens in the 350s to 450s BC, that this great thought was going through. So Orpheus, what does he do? He does not have faith. Why? I don't know. Why does Orpheus not have any faith? Well, it seems that Orpheus not having a faith, what ends up happening is as he looks behind because he does not trust that Hades is going to give him what he wants, she disappears. This is a very important understanding in what it means to walk up from the underworld, from the land of the dead, from the land of the unconscious mind. What does that mean? Well, there's a certain way to break it down what that means. And the one way we can look at it as is if we understand the great marriage, the sacred great work, the alchemized understanding of the human person in the world is that the masculine must merge with the feminine. Why? Well, because in the Timaeus, Plato talks about how the world came to be. And in his understanding, at one time, his symbol was the androgynous individual, where the masculine and the feminine were connected. And upon creating the world, who created the world? In Platonic sense, the demiurge created the world. And what ended up happening with that is he was a great craftsman. So it's not the same demiurge as, say, the Gnostic demiurge. There are many Gnostic cults and sects. A lot of the times they thought the demiurge was an archonic force, an archonic creator, a great terrible person, being that is a tyrant. Plato did not have that same thought. He thought of the demiurge as a description of the craftsman. The craftsman. Interesting. If we know anything about magical institutions, magical schools, mystical schools, these great lineages that have gone across through time, isn't that what we are trying to have them understand? They're trying to have them understand that you, as above, so below, the microcosm and the macrocosm, the yin and the yang of the great universe, you are the great craftsman of your own work. This is something that's going to be unfolded throughout this conversation and many conversations that we have together, because it's really important to understand what we're talking about. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about the cosmological story of the individual through time, as the hero's journey is integrated into our very understanding of what the base of what humans have been trying to do from the beginning of time. The beginning of time is a very important understanding of all these things. And so we have to first premise what was the beginning of time. And that's really hard to do because we can't really think of anything that happens before time. And so time is a construct, time and space. Maybe it wasn't something as a materiality, it doesn't seem, was the first thing to be created. But maybe it was an idea. And that idea was consciousness. And this is something I think that Plato is getting at as we go through understanding Socrates, the teacher of Plato, and where Socrates was coming from, this Orphic tradition and this Pythagorean tradition, these two different cults at that time, not cult like as in Scientology or cult as in any of these crazed cults that do bad things that we think of that term in, but just cult as a group of individuals that were passing along teachings. And those, like Christianity was a cult, a Gnostic cult before it ever became what it is today. And there are many things that are like that. And so let's think of the Pythagorean mystery cult, the mystery school, a grouping of individuals who are forming along a path of an idea, an ideology, a set of rules that they accord themselves towards, and a set of teachings of dogma, we get those two ideas stemming into the Socrates, the teacher of Plato. Socrates, walking around the great Athens, was just doing that, all rabble-rouser. Socrates, the rabble-rouser, the man who was questioning the great democracy. Sounds very familiar to today. He was just making question, bringing in the youth and asking them questions. And these questions would start off very simple, as in just questioning how they viewed normal everyday topics, such as love, writing, justice. What does it mean to be pious? What is democracy? What does the greatest city and state look like, and how do we build that up? What do you think justice is? What does it mean to be wise? There's just a lot of things. These questions, fascinating as they are, they're not as talked about today, interesting enough, because maybe they're a little too abstract for most people to try to understand, or maybe because we've all been fooled by the shadows on the cave wall. And that's what I'm getting to, is that what does it mean to perceive the shadows on the wall for what they are? But we're not there yet. So let's continue. These Orphic traditions and the Pythagorean traditions were doing just that, understanding the base makeup of reality through their understanding of what they would call, or what they would have be as like a science. But they would go through certain rituals and initiations to understand consciousness through time, through storytelling and mythology, and symbols and signs. They would try to understand the base makeup of things themselves. But it was through, normally at that time frame, the allegories that they were telling, like Orpheus and his allegories. Pythagoras was everyone sees Pythagoras as what? The Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared plus c squared, right? But that is so stupid. And not that we don't need the Pythagorean theorem, but it's, of all the things that Pythagoras taught, that is the most ridiculous thing. He was teaching and coming up with ideas of the human soul. The human soul is that which helps us become embodied in the material world, something that the Neoplatonics would come out and write about in droves. This idea of how so with the Orphic tradition and Orpheus with music and song and playing his lyre, the 7-string lyre, right? There are different strings for lyres, but we have this one. The 7 make up the bass octave level of the pianos and of music. And we get Pythagoras coming up with his ideals of the harmony of the spheres, trying to understand the ascent from materiality up into the heavens and the divine. Interesting enough, all these things would happen in that time period in caves. So what is it about this cave that we're talking about? And is the cave all that bad? Well, in this way, it's good. In the Pythagorean ascent and this Orphic ascent, it's good because it's you travel into the cave as the mystic or the magician to cut off all your senses from the outside world. And upon cutting off all your senses from the outside world, you can get to, as close to possible, things as such, what Kant would call the noumena, the thing in itself. But to the Pythagoreans or to the Orphics, we didn't have that same, we weren't trying to get to, they were trying to get to the thing itself, but they were more getting along and trying to understand the great mysteries. And so once you quiet all these noises and then you go up into the real world, from the cave, from the unconscious mind into the conscious mind, we start to understand and look up to the stars. So we can see things as they are and listen to the music as the constellations move, as they move through the horary world. And as it moves along the sky, we start to map things, the cycles of nature themselves. So it seems like we're as close to things as such as possible, understanding the cycles of nature and the seasons and what that means to human consciousness, which is different than how the mythologies of Homer were talking about them. And that style of mythology moving all along through time, right? Sumerians had their own with Enki and Enlil and the Mesopotamians and such and so forth as they move through the countries. They also were in that time frame, coming up with the ideas of Noah and the Old Testament were happening. And, past that, finally we get again to the pre-Socratics. We're like, no, let's try to figure it out. Let's try to find the base understanding. What is it? Let's not just use gods anymore. I want an element. I want science. And then from there, we move into Socrates. Again, Socrates handing down these mystery school teachings, I would state. And Plato learning from Socrates, and Plato also then in his work handing down mystery school teachings of the creation. But we're not even talking about that anymore. When we get to Socrates, he's asking us these questions, these moral and ethical questions. But they didn't see it as that. They didn't see it as we're just talking about morality when he's asking questions about what is justice and wisdom and piousness, questioning the great democracy at that time frame. What he was getting at in those things was he's trying to teach something. What was it? And I think it was just that which hasn't been, and we're not. It's being this thing that he's talking about, that Socrates, that he's really getting at then in the Republic. Socrates only ever spoke through Plato's work. Socrates wrote nothing down, which is why I'm relating it back to the Homeric tradition, the oral tradition of the bards, the magical teachings of this world where magic and mysticism were everywhere. Forces of nature were all around us. What do we talk about it as? It almost seems like the imaginal world, the world of the phantasmagoria, of imagination. And I don't mean it as some flimsy-bimsy Disney level of imagination. This world of the dream, the world of the shaman, of the aboriginal, outside time. Because time comes around when all of a sudden we have the ability to write things down and keep track of things in a different way. And then you ask, what about cuneiform? What about these ancient levels of language? Yeah, they wrote those things down, but you know who did that? The priest class, the aristocracy, those who ruled the land. It wasn't the normal, everyday, mundane individual just walking around, making sure food was on the tables and is trying to survive every day in that life. It was the priest class, those who could understand language. Some would say it was those who were passing down and still around when the Younger Dryas period ends up happening and there was a fall, a great fall, the great cataclysm, one that spoke about in the Epic of Gilgamesh, or we speak about with Noah and his flood, this myth through time. Plato talks about it in the Timaeus. What does he talk about? He talks about Atlantis. Today I found out Atlantis was one of the most widely talked about places and things in all of our history. It's fascinating. Whether true or false, it's fascinating that when someone says the term Atlantis, everybody knows. Everybody kind of knows. A mythical and mystical land that had levels of technology that we can't even fathom. But now we're starting to fathom it because where our world is going from where it was, magic seems to be in the palm of our hands. The ability to speak to millions of people, thousands upon thousands and millions of people from your living room. It seems like magic to me. Oh, it's almost close to trying to understand even what telepathy even is. But we move on. Plato talked about Atlantis in the Great Timaeus. Everyone should go out and read it. It's really short. It may be hard because it's not done in the kind of writing that everyone's used to. And in this day and age, everyone seems to be spoon-fed, right? You can just scroll. You don't have to read. You don't have to formulate your own thought. You can just take the thought of another. This is exactly what Plato was talking about in his Phaedrus dialogues, where he starts talking about what it's like. What does it mean to be a statesman? What is a charlatan? What they call sophistry. It's okay to try to come up with your own thoughts, not to write them down. Why? Because when you write them down, lies abound, where you can just spew nonsense to people that isn't something that you've thought about yourself. And so in the Phaedrus, which is a lot of it is about the divine madness, one of Plato's dialogues of Socrates, where he's actually not within the city, but he's out in the normal everyday world of the forests and the trees, out amongst the muses. It's beautiful. Read the Phaedrus. I wrote a poem on it once in college. I wrote the poem to Radiohead, interesting enough, an instrumental version of In Rainbows. Why? Because what you need when you're writing is a nice little cadence. You don't need it. It helps me. But the cadence is, right, an evocation of the muses. Just something that Socrates was talking about. Everything that Socrates ever spoke of in the Phaedrus was a lie until this moment where he finally was hitting upon a level of love, a love for the divine. And that divine exudes a scent of madness upon it. This whole dialogue coming after they saw the sophist talk about laws and rules and things that he was reading off of a piece of paper. And so it's interesting enough is maybe that's something that Socrates is trying to talk to us about, questioning these people who are before you, speaking of things that maybe they don't quite understand from a pulpit. And that's different than having a dialogue. A dialogue with somebody where you can speak back, talk, and understand thoughts by breaking first them down, going through the Socratic method. An interlocutor, somebody that is there to be questioned and then to have a dialogue back and forth so we can understand what we're having, a dialectic, so to speak. And we're like, hey, I thought the stream was about deep within the cave and Plato's allegory of the cave. I'm like, how can you understand Plato's allegory of the cave if you don't even know where Plato came from? Interesting enough. Plato, the student of Socrates. Plato was himself part of the aristocracy. Crazy, huh? Before, though, the differentiation between the aristocracy of old and the aristocracy of new is that, or the oligarchy of new, is that Plato was in a war. He was in a war for most of his life until he became under the tutelage of Socrates. And so Plato was of the warrior class, as well as of a royal lineage in his own right. Great-great-grandfather was Solon. He talks about it in the Timaeus, where he talks about Solon having his understanding of Atlantis. And that myth of Atlantis is then moved down into Plato being able to talk about Atlantis in a way where it talks about, in his very esoteric terms, as a way of speaking on what Pythagoras was getting about in the harmony of the spheres. There's this beautiful connection between all these thinkers and thoughts. And it's really, it is difficult unless you do the research yourself and try to understand that when you come out of a mystery tradition, there are certain things you can't speak about. Why? Well, it's going to be gotten at in the allegory of the cave. He's speaking it out loud. Why? And it then connects through time on why Magus in the media, why read and read books, literature, watch films and stories, anime, comic books. When they're written well, they reflect part of ourselves. One of the fun images you can think about is the image of God reflecting upon himself the oceans of chaos. And what did he do? But he saw his own image. This is a beautiful understanding of the beginning of time. Interesting enough, Plato had to write things down, right? Socrates didn't, Plato did. So it's an interesting thing where we're finding some contradictions in terms, right? Plato also talked about through the mouth of Socrates in his dialogues that poetry, the poets are the worst of all people. And yet, Plato was writing in poem. He was writing in poetry. He was writing in poetry. Yeah, if you're writing in poetry, how could it be the worst way? And why he thought so, talking about in the Republic, Plato thought that the poets were the worst people because they're not talking about the forms. They're talking in representation, in mimesis, in this version of untruth. But I think what we're trying to understand is when he speaks of poetry that way, I think he's talking in the exoteric term. those like the sophists speak in charlatans, speaking in tongue, speaking in a way that is using rhetoric in a way to spread lies, to try to get people to understand the world that they want to be, not the world as it is. And that is the difference between somebody like Plato using poetry, using the dialogues, using story to tell truth. Because there is truth within these stories. A lot of the Republic gets a lot of hate. Gets a lot of hate because of it seems like they're spewing certain levels of inequality. He talks about eugenics. He's telling people that they have to live within a class structure. And what I'm getting at in all this, in a certain way, in the way, is how Socrates was trying to teach something other than just what was justice, what are virtues. But he was getting at a way of thinking. And this way of thinking was trying to help people understand that we must not only question authority, but we must question our authority, my authority. You must question the great ego, which is the great demiurge, the craftsman of all things. Does this make sense? Does it make sense to question your own understanding, your own perceptions? So in the Republic, you get just that. The makeup and the creation of the great city. The Allegory of the Cave stems from Book 5 of the Republic. Go out and read it. Yes, read the whole dialogues. It would make way more sense to read all of the Republic. I have a great one right here with the lighting. I don't know if you can see it. It's The Republic of Plato by Alan Bloom. Of what I can read, I've read a bunch of different versions of the Republic, and this one so far is the best. Why? Because he's not trying to use his nervous system and his own opinions on what he thinks Plato is saying, but he's translating it in a way that leaves all of it and allows you to make your own choices. It's quite spectacular. So, the Republic. Interesting enough, I learned from this book that in that time frame, obviously, once he said it, it made sense. There is no such thing as the word republic. In that time frame, the word republic was more like the term regime. But he does state, Alan Bloom states how actually that word in our day and age has a lot of baggage. So let's just use the republic, right? That's okay, right? Of course, because as we're translating, we have to get to the closest possible terms as possible. So reading this in ancient Greek would probably be better, but a lot harder because you got to know Greek. I continue. Interesting enough, the Republic is not only a great philosophical tome, but read in a lot of classical literature classes and can be dissected in many ways. Why does Plato matter? Plato matters because then of who his student was. Plato matters because of a lot of reasons. The basic understanding of the metaphysics of idealism and the idea being the base nature of all things as the world stems from that. Consciousness stemming out of things first. I'm putting that language on Plato, the term consciousness, because they didn't have that word or that term. And maybe he wouldn't use it. Maybe it's not synonymous with the forms, right? Is what most people know of Plato, the forms. But I think it's really interesting is if Socrates is trying to negotiate terms with trying to understand how to philosophize, how to become a philosopher, how to philosopher. What's philosopher mean? What's philosophy mean? It can be broken down, right? Philosophia, the love of wisdom. But that doesn't really, that's very poetic. And so let's try to break it down in a different way. Yes, we can love wisdom, but what then is love and what is wisdom? Maybe it's an understanding, an intimate understanding. Love as an intimacy, this eros, this passion for understanding. Wisdom being the highest level of understanding. An understanding of the divine. Let's let that sink in. Then philosophy and philosophizing is trying to understand and a passion for this influence of the divine. But what is the divine without the individual? And so then we must add that into our understanding of the divine. Because the divine is just the divine, right? The logos, the nous, God, the great creator, the prime mover, as Aristotle calls it. The individual is here, so we must count that into the complexity of what it means to be, what it means to be human. And so if you take away the idea, the divine, from our understanding of what it means to be, then what do we have? We don't have philosophy. Philosophy is then the love of the divine, the passion to understanding our place and makeup in the world of God, the universe, whatever these terms are, these words. And so we can get down to what it means. Philosophy. Boethius, in his Consolation of Philosophy, who was himself a devout man, when locked in prison and writing and coming up with this Consolation of Philosophy, is an amazing book. He actually doesn't speak to God or the Christian God, the Christian logos, right? Well, Yahweh, Jehovah. But what he's speaking to is Lady Philosophy. I find that profound. So he's speaking to philosophy. What does that mean? Well, in alchemy, we have the understandings of the Negredo, the great blackening, the breakdown. The breakdown of coagula solve. And I think what we're trying to do is and what we're doing here is and what I'm doing with all of this, and I think those in the world of bringing meaning back into the world, so we're trying to bring that divine spark, the meaning from the breakdown. I think the deconstructionism from after the Enlightenment period has done a lot of damage in our world. Because what is deconstruction without reconstruction, right? And this is something we get in Full Metal Alchemist, Brotherhood, in the story in the manga Full Metal Alchemist. I will not speak of Full Metal Alchemist, the first anime, because it doesn't follow the manga, the tome, the canon. So what does that mean? One of the bad guys, Scar, his brother figured out by combining Western alchemy with Eastern mysticism alchemy, how to use a sigil and tattoo on each arm the transmutation circle of deconstruction and reconstruction. The brother died. So Scar put just deconstruction on his arm. And so he was nothing but an agent of chaos, destroying everything in his path for his own revenge. Until the end, where he had an epiphany, a revelation. He must put on his arm, he must unite with reconstruction. He must be able to create. And then in this one man's hero's journey, unfolding through this beautiful story, Full Metal Alchemist, you get to see his great work, his merger of the masculine and the feminine, the anima and the animus. He has become whole. And yet he still has to deal with his karma. He still has to go through great suffering. But he bears no name after that. He is no longer Scar. He is nameless. It's profound. Why is it profound? It's profound because it's in a mere kid's story, right? It's just a manga. It's not really trying to tell us anything. It's just a mythology. And mythology is just fiction. But what really getting at is that fiction is more real and truthful than most of our facts, because facts are what? Baseless, meaningless without context, and context means nothing without everything else around it. Context is just that. But what happens when you put context after context and things within things, and all of a sudden you get a story. That story plays out and we understand it and we tell it through time. And so we go back to understanding why Plato is important and why Socrates. And why, yes, I do truly believe that the cell phone is the modern cave. It's just one iteration of the modern cave, the shadows of the scroll. It's beautiful. Thank you, Electrical Sage Mastery. It's the shadows of the scroll. The phone is another version of what Plato was talking about with the Phaedrus and listening to the person on the pulpit spew his speech, something that he did not create, he doesn't have to believe, and he has no understanding for. You can just spew forth writing that's not your own to a group of individuals, and then through that, all these people out in front of you, as the sophist sits on his pulpit, reading from his transcript and spreading the message of whoever wrote the transcript. Now, instead of paper, we have cell phones that sit on pulpits, and we read, and then we spew. And then we want everyone else to believe the narrative that I'm telling. Isn't that fascinating? How then we haven't even gotten to Plato's allegory of the cave yet. And yet we can see through certain dialogues, through this tradition, that how important storytelling is. And if you can have others initiated into understanding what these signs and symbols are, they can see and view beneath the narrative in the actual story. And that's the story of the human individual trying to understand their place in the world. And our place in the world is more than just within the illusions and the shadows on the cave wall. Fascinating enough, most of our religions are actually laid upon the foundations of Plato and Aristotle. Christianity itself, the reason it's so big, and I know this is an obfuscation in its own terms because it's more than that. There are these great medieval thinkers who have helped prop up these religions, but they used the very substance and essences of Plato and Aristotle. Who's Aristotle? If Plato was the idea, then Aristotle is the cave. But I don't mean that in a negative way. What I mean that by is that Aristotle is the empiricist, the one who must search the world for knowledge instead of having norms. He created zoology and biology. He's the creator of the great book, The Physics. He also has his metaphysics. And he's the backbone of ethics, the Nicomachean ethics, the middle path, to not fall to either extremes. And I think all of those things are also amazing, and they must be read. Because I also believe that Aristotle was at first a Platonist until the cycles of history came upon it and we needed somebody like an Aristotle to do his thing. Why? Because Aristotle then taught Alexander the Great. Alexander of Macedonia, the son of King Philip. So Alexander the Great, the one who then does the true path of Achilles, Alexander the Great slept with the Iliad underneath his pillow. And so he was taking on the essence and invoking this great warrior Achilles. Somebody that even Agamemnon, the king, the great warrior king who was massing the siege of Troy. Alexander the Great did his thing, and we get the Hellenized world, the global world of Alexandria, where all the great library, there were multiple, were this area where it was a melting pot of diversity, and where all the great magical traditions merged and it could learn, and you could teach, and you could listen, and it was an explosion. It was the great Renaissance of that time. And so without Aristotle doing his thing in the material world and the empirical world within the cave as an allegory and a symbol for the shadows on the wall, he was also trying to tell what is truth in his own way, but he was trying to explain it in a way that was more exoteric. He filled in a lot of blanks with his understanding of the metaphysics. And so going from levels of abstraction, depending on how we're looking at it, Aristotle was getting closer to what he thought was more of the concrete reality. Or so some historians of philosophy think. Some, as if you were a Platonist, you'd think, no, you're getting farther away from what reality is, of what the things in themselves are, of the noumenal world. Great question. Does Plato or Socrates speak to philosophy, love of wisdom, or Sophia herself, wisdom? Yeah, he does. Yeah. But what he's doing is in each dialogue, he's going into the world of Athens, around the city, speaking in a certain way, speaking of the love of wisdom, right? Talking about what is mean to be pious, in the Euthyphro. What does it mean? What is justice in the Republic and all these different things? But in the Phaedrus, what does he do? Well, like I said, he goes outside amongst the muses and speaks to the muses. I think then that is him speaking to Sophia herself. Right? There are many different muses. The term that we get, how we get museum. And so as he's out there amongst the muses, amongst the divine itself, if Athens is the cave for Socrates, going out into the forests, into nature, is seeking the forms, seeking wisdom itself, Sophia, playing amongst the forms. And you got to remember that in Plato's dialogues, you have an early, a middle, and a late dialogue as he's laying out his philosophy. Because he never is he's not like Spinoza, right? Leibniz, these Enlightenment thinkers, these modern philosophers who are even in Aquinas' Summa Theologia, where he's laying it out in a very Aristotelian way, like Aristotle does. Right? Aristotle's a perfect understanding of what I'm talking about. Where it's this is my philosophy of metaphysics. Here are all my terms. This is what I think the world is like in reality. Here is my metaphysics. Here are my terms. The Nicomachean ethics. He's talking about what does it mean to be moral and virtuous? What does it mean to be ethical? How does the polis, the political, sit within all of that? And so this is how we can talk about the idea in the cave. And this is how we're going to get into the Republic. You guys are doing well. Let us continue. Let's get deep within the cave now. So in the Republic in Book 5, Plato is speaking through in his dialogues Socrates. So the Republic itself is a book that has lots of different books within it. And it starts off with a simple, basic question of Socrates speaking to a bunch of students and a bunch of Athenians. And one of them that he's speaking to is Plato's brother, Glaucon. Plato has a brother. Yeah, weird. Plato, being the warrior aristocrat, also amongst the city, has a family. And Glaucon is one of them, and he's in many of his dialogues. And so you get in the beginning, Socrates talking to not only Glaucon, but a bunch of other of the Athenians and different other people. And so interesting enough, what he's doing is when he's talking about these things is he's asking the question. The Republic is about what is justice? And from asking the question, what is justice? And having these different characters try to give them their understanding of what justice is. Might equals right. And, turning the other cheek and all these other things, what the just is. You get him to explain then the Republic. What does that mean? He gets to explain the state. What is the best city? What is the best republic for people to live within? And within the republic, you get many ideas, and they are really trying to break down what is justice. And from justice, we get to understand the human soul. And how? How do we get there? Well, before we get there, we can talk about then how they understood the human soul, the city, and virtues. They understand it through the tripartite soul. You have wisdom, you have courage, and you have fortitude. You have gold, you have silver, and you have bronze. You have the philosopher kings, you have the guardian warrior class, and you have the craftsman. That is the tripart soul, and that is the tripart city. The Republic is a reflection of the individual. So if the individual is out of sorts, the Republic is out of sorts. Interesting enough, I think we're feeling that a lot these days, that the Republic is out of sorts. But that is then the question, and that's why Socrates is trying to teach us something. He's trying to teach us how to philosophize, how to ask questions instead of being reactionary. The true revolution is in the mind. All the great philosophers of the past were trying to talk about those things. And I think that is why why the Republic, the Great Republic, the techno-oligarchic class is an inverted version of the philosopher kings. These people think they've witnessed the forms, but they haven't. Let's go back to the disharmony and the imbalance of things right now. Right now, as in ancient Greece. And so talking about the Republic, right, was understanding that in the Republic, you have the philosopher kings who rule, the warrior class who is the guardians of the city, and the craftsmen who are the people who go around the city and making sure everything works. This is also where ideas such as metempsychosis and transmigration come in. This is where Socrates' ideas about eugenics matter. That the philosopher kings own nothing, interesting enough. They own nothing but are the ones who know all, because they are the ones who have witnessed the forms the most. In past life, the philosopher kings were the ones who were amongst the forms the most, saw more. And when they were born into that class. And as you get down, the warrior class has their places to live. It is an egalitarian society in the way where women and men are both warriors. But then there also isn't marriage. You don't know who your children are. And so there's levels of eugenics and breeding that only the philosopher kings know. Because if you knew who your parents were, then you don't worship the state. Then you aren't fighting for the highest, greater good. And you can't then be just. Because you may first help your family and go against the state's orders. So it's an interesting question, which is then again goes back to why a lot of people hate on Socrates and Plato's Republic. But then again, I think it's going back to the same contradiction of terms and these things that we're coming across is that I think it's meant to do that, to stir up questions. Socrates was teaching us how to philosophize, how to understand things not from our own opinion-making apparatuses, but trying to get to truth, objective truth. And so we continue, right? The tripartite state with the philosopher kings, the warrior class, and the craftsman. And then the individual has the tripartite soul, right? So we were run by the rational mind, the reason, wisdom. And then in the middle, we have our warrior, the courageousness of the soul. And then at the lowest aspect, we have desire, the animal desire. all three must keep themselves in check, but the rational, the reason reigns supreme. And so if we can get all those things in check and the tripartite soul is balanced and harmonious, you can uphold the just, and then the republic is actually the city is harmonious and just. So that is the republic as we go through it. But not just the tripartite soul, because you can't just get there. So what must we do? We must first get to the understanding of education. He spoke about the good. One of his conversations with one of his students was about the good. What is the good? He has the allegory of the sun. The sun is so bright and it sits up there witnessing all. The sun is one of the representations of the forms. We can't get quite to the forms yet because the sun must be understood, but that sun illuminates upon us all and does something like what Heidegger would call aletheia. The ancient Greek Parmenides would call aletheia, or disclosure, or revealing. Unconcealedness actually is a great term to have it come to. So the sun shines upon things that you bring into the clearing or come up from the cave, and it blinds you, but it gives you clean and clear vision once that blinding, that suffering kind of vanishes. So from there, we get the visible and the invisible with a conversation about the line. And so he's trying to have us understand these two. What is the visible? Well, it's our sense perceptions. It's how everything that we can see, feel, touch, and hear. It's the visible. But the visible is only there because of the invisible, the things that the visible things represent. And in the invisible way, that is where we get the forms. So finally, we are upon the allegory of the cave. This is one of the many reasons why philosophy is not for the weak. Because to understand, we must converse. And to converse, we must break things down. But as the great sacred marriage is trying to tell us, we must then put it back together. But part of the breakdown is trying to understand the shadows on the wall. First, we can't even understand what the shadows on the wall are. We have to first understand that there are shadows on the wall. Interesting. Good question. I just thought that philosophy would give him advice on how to become a better lover of wisdom, while speaking to Sophia would turn love from thought to action. Interesting enough, so he never spoke of, and you can fact check this, but it seems like he never spoke of Sophia. Right? The breaking down philosophy into the lover of wisdom, wisdom being translated as Sophia, is a Gnostic understanding of what Sophia is. Sophia, one of the aeons, right? Philosophia, right? Sophia not as a person or even a being, but Sophia is translated to wisdom, right? And so when he goes out into the natural world and into nature, he finally finds and has this madness breakdown. And it's not madness as in manic, but it's the idea that the magician, or the mystic swims where the madman drowns. And so we must understand the differentiation between madness. You have the divine madness. You have the madness of love and love and a lover. And then you have the madness of the manic madman. There's more than that. But that's the best way to understand it, is that divine madness is madness of the gods. This ecstasis, this ecstatic breakdown that you have when you finally understand that there is more to you in the world than what you first understood. And yeah, it can be closely related to the entheogenic uses of the shamanic cultures. Because interesting enough, the pre-Platonic, a lot of this knowledge came down from the shamanic world of Greece, even from the mountains. And Socrates was also a learned one of the shamanic cultures of ancient Greece. You can find that in P.D. Newman's book. He's a brilliant scholar. And so I think it's really important to understand that then by having this divine madness that you can then go back into the city, and it's not like it's somebody just telling you something, right? He is involved with the muses, these forces of nature that have him tap into the poetic, the intellect, and its base form. And then from there, and then all the other ones, dance, music, mysteries. And then once you have that ecstasis, that ecstatic experience that some shamanic cultures take entheogenic drugs to help unleash the somatic experience, or you can have it when trying to understand in all these different things that I've talked about that Socrates was talking about. And then, as Socrates states, Socrates said that he knows nothing. But how many times that's not like you just say that once and it's like, no, I don't know anything, right? He was trying to get us to think about something in a way that takes it from just what you're asking, from thoughts to actions. And so you must understand that it's not this linear thing that goes from thought to action. But just like we understand in the Hermetic Kabbalah and the Tree of Life and the Sephirah, or in the Pythagorean Tritax, the 10, the pyramid of the 10 dots, is that when, as the great Ike Baker has said, and many before him on the magical path and traditions and understandings of the Greco-theurgical traditions, is that when you have one, you have 10. And if you have 10, you have them all. And I think that's really important. One being the highest, the monad, the absolute. It's only a representation of the nothingness, a mirror image of itself. And then from the one to the two to the three to the many, right? Similar to the Taoist understanding of from Wu to the Tao, right? From the Tao to the Wu to the yin and the yang. From those two, we have the 10,000. Is trying to teach us a way of thinking. And I think, and I feel, and I reflect upon the idea of how important it is to try to understand that it's about how you think about things. It's how you intend, your consciousness is intending itself upon the world. That then that base understanding is that then my perceptions of things aren't the things in themselves. And then that gets us to understanding of the allegory of the cave. So here we go. You picture this, if you will. Imagine yourself with other people, with other prisoners. You were born in the cave. You were born in the darkness. And in that darkness, you were chained from birth against a wall. And on that wall, your arms and legs are in shackles, is shackled to the wall. And you cannot move. And in front of you, you see shadows. Think now that you're shackled to a wall. In front of you is a wall. And on that wall, there is a light on the wall because there are shadows on the wall. All kinds of shadows. Shadows of animals and pots and plants, people. And you're shackled to this wall. And behind that wall, there is a big flame. Candle, fire. But that's a little ways back. Because in between that, there are actual people not chained. Different kinds of prisoners, I would presume. But they're not chained to the wall. And they are walking back and forth, doing their normal everyday thing. Just like, for some reason, these people are shackled to a wall, but who cares? And now I'm going to continue walking amongst the normal cave-like world. And I'm just going to leave those people shackled. Why not? And so you're shackled to a wall and you hear these noises and sounds. But since you don't know there are people behind you and that there's this flame behind you, you imagine that the fire, the flame, the light upon the wall is the only one true light. And then the shadows are real. And the sounds you hear must be coming from the shadows. Profound. No, we're not there yet. So now let's understand then that one day for some reason, your shackles come off. They just come loose. Okay, great. And you get up, and everyone's all like, "Where are you going?" And you're all like, "I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know how to walk." Interesting enough, these people would be so frail that they wouldn't even be able to walk around. They would be so frail you couldn't even get up. But I mean, that's a great symbolism in and of itself, of prisoners against a wall, and their bodies, they're not embodied at all. So how can you even do anything, let alone try to understand that the shadows on the wall aren't real? Because they're not. And so you get up and you realize that you can go behind the wall. And so you do that and you crawl, and all of a sudden you see, wait, there are people that aren't shackled. And those people are carrying things. And those things and those people that they're carrying and whatnot are reflecting because there's a fire right there. Interesting. I can only surmise then that you would be like, what is going on? And then you'd be like, why are these people not A, letting everyone else go, but B, most likely, and it doesn't quite say this, but I can interpolate and extract this meaning, is that I can imagine that the people who know that there are prisoners chained to the wall since birth and are carrying these things around, doing their normal everyday cave-like thing, would then probably, most likely, maybe I'm guessing they worship the flame, the great fire, right? Interesting. It's an interesting thought. And so we continue. And that's why we talk in stories. So as we're talking and we're having this dialogue, right? Because I can only imagine, just like the schizophrenic that I am, I'm not, but that you are all listening. And when you're listening to this, you're talking back. And you are, some of you. And you can continue to do that. But the idea is then once you realize that that's a fire and that there are these people, and now you look and you can see the shadows on the wall, that those shadows, wow, those aren't real. That's crazy. Okay, where does this tunnel lead? I actually see a light far off into the distance, and this light is coming through the cave entrance. So I must be somewhere. And so you just do that. You're human. You're exploratory. You want to know what is going on. So you walk up the cave. And upon walking up the cave, what do? You walk out. And upon walking out, you're blinded by the sun. You can't see anything. It actually hurts and you suffer great pain. Why? Well, because you've never witnessed such like brightness, because all the only brightness you've ever seen was a flame on a wall, and that wall brightness, which you thought was bright, isn't. And you thought it was illuminating some kind of truth, but it's not. And so the first thing we must understand is then, what are those shadows on the cave wall? They're not even symbols. And symbols at least connote some kind of, or denote some kind of meaning. But since these are just shadows of something else, they're meaningless. And so I want you to know that those shadows on the cave wall are like our sense perceptions. Our sense perceptions of things that we're seeing, like the cup, the computer, right? Anything in your room right now, you're not perceiving them plainly. You're only perceiving your perception of what that thing is, of what every other cup in existence ever looked like. So you can even know that that word cup makes sense to the cup itself. So after a while, the blinding of the light actually recedes. And what happens after the blinding of the light recedes, you start to see and witness things around you. Instead of the tree or the plant that was walking on top of the head of a person or being held from the flame on the wall, which you thought was a tree, and you thought it's shaking as the person was moving that you didn't know was there, was the sound of the actual tree shaking, as in the wind blowing the tree and the leaves falling. You actually get to witness that now. And so now you're like, what's that? That thing which I thought was a tree is not a tree, and this is what we call tree? Fascinating. Fascinating. And it's not even just with the tree. It's with the sun. It's with people. It's with everything around you. The stream, right? The dirt, the ground. And then as things happen, you realize that the sun is warming you. And all of a sudden you feel fulfilled and vital. There's this vitality that the sun, which is shining the light upon the ground and illuminating your surroundings, that now you see things for what you think they truly are. Funny enough, that's just another cave, very matrixy, right? Once you get out of the matrix, you realize that the desert of the real is just another matrix of control. But it's not just that. The sun now goes back to the story before we get to the allegory of the cave, but the sun is a representation of the good. And what is the good? The good is another representation of the forms, the Platonic forms that are all around everybody. The forms are the ideal, in the ideal realm, the realm of God. And the forms, there could be, I'm not going to be able to just tell you what they are, because that's a whole lecture. That's like 6 lectures in and of themselves, what Plato thinks about the forms. And so just simply enough, what is knowledge but the true? Knowledge is trying to uncover truth, or the episteme. That's what epistemology in philosophy classes are. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. And so for Plato, how you get knowledge and get away from opinions is that you witness the forms and have a better understanding of the forms. Not the representation of the thing, but the thing in and of themselves. So even the tree, when you witness it out of the cave, as the sun, which is the good, the highest representation of the good, is shining upon all the things, the tree you're seeing and the sun you're seeing are just a representation of the sun that is in the forms. Interesting enough, the Platonic forms then are these geometrical shapes, right? Starting off with the sphere, the circle, which is creation and the encompassment of the good and God. And then you move forth from that, right? The square and the triangle, the pentagon and the heptagon, all the way up to the dodecahedron, the most divine of all geometrical forms, the hidden shape through time. This is something that Pythagoras was talking about, which is then how we can know that one of Plato's teachers and one of the traditions he is carrying on is Pythagoras' mystery school. Because when you get to the forms, you get to the good and you get to what harmony is. And harmony is stemming from something that is what Pythagoras is talking about in his harmony of the spheres, or understanding of music and octaves. And so it's fascinating that then when the sun goes down, you can witness the sky for the first time. So you're the prisoner, right? Undone from his shackles, turned around and sees that there are this fire with these people who are just being shadows on, they're casting a shadow on the wall. So what once you thought was the real, you realize is just something you were perceiving to be real. And that then you crawled and walked your way, and it probably took some time to get out of the cave, right? The journey out of the cave is like the journey through self-realization, a great awakening, your own hero's journey. Super deep into this. You're starting to understand how the allegory of the cave and the hero's journey are synonymous in their own right. The monomyth. The call to adventure outside of the cave. That call to adventure happened because of you accepted at one time, maybe that things, are you sure? You're asking your boy next to you, hey, how do I know that those shadows on the wall, which I think are real, are maybe, hear me out. What if that's not real? And your boy's like, shut up, bro. No. That's real. What do you mean? And you're like, okay, I'll just keep that to myself. And one day, for some reason, maybe it was that thought, that stemming, that God internal, as the in this, what he talks about in here is Promethean fire. Prometheus stealing the fire from the gods is like the prisoner inside the cave finally realizing that he must walk out of the cave. So we can state how that Promethean fire is us trying to understand finally that maybe the way I view reality isn't that, but maybe I have to step outside reality a little bit, which is actually stepping inside reality, right? So it's fascinating how we use language in a certain way, and it's very Aristotelian language of trying to of state what something is. This is that, right? That's Aristotle's syllogisms, and how we speak. That some A is B, right, and not C. A cannot be B. A cannot be A, right? It has to be something else. The law of conservation. And so where were we? You just talked to your boy here, and he's like, "Hey, this isn't real." And you crawled your way out, and you're having your hero's journey, this adventure out of the cave. You've accepted that. You've been initiated now. Why? What's the initiation? You came outside the cave, and you were illuminated by the sun, the representation of the good, the representation of the forms, and you're witnessing things for as you think they are until the sun goes down, and you witness the fabric of existence in the sky, the constellations, things that we've been trying to path and try to understand from the beginning of time. You think you're witnessing this, the harmony of the spheres, a reflection of the human soul. And then the sun comes back up, and you're blinded, but it's a little bit easier. And you're like, okay, I think I understand. I've had a realization. You now have become what Plato would call a philosopher king. Fascinating theory of the philosopher kings. In the Republic, the philosopher kings rule, but here is the contradiction, and here is why philosophy is so important. Once you become a philosopher king, once you witness the beauty of the forms, once you go through the disillusionment and the deconstruction and the reconstruction, the alchemical passageway of the hero's journey, and you're initiated, who wants to then go back in the cave and rule the cave? A psychotic. That's all I can tell you. So that's the contradiction, is that the philosopher kings will never want to rule the cave. The cave is the material realm. The cave is the world everywhere around you. The cave is the TV and the media and the scrolling and the ear talking, the gaslighting and the narratives that are all around us. The politics of today, the material world is such, the things that we perceive, that is the cave. Going shopping and eating food and hanging out with friends, you're in the cave. Going to your 9-to-5 job, all those things. The philosopher king is now steps outside, right? You become the philosopher king when you witness the forms. And just as the way of, as we talk about with transmigration or reincarnation, in the Platonic sense, you get is metempsychosis, is that when he relates it to two horses, and when you die, you're the charioteer, and you have a black horse and a white horse, and each are vying for power. The black horse is all your karma and suffering and all the bad things you've ever done. Again, this is going to take a lot more, but this is where we're at. The white horse is the good and the just and the virtuous part of yourself. The black horse is holding you back, and the white horse is trying to get to see the forms as much as possible. And each transmigration of the soul, you witness a little more of the forms based upon the life that you lived. And let's say you witnessed a large part of the forms, and then you come back down, boom, you're a philosopher king. You're in that caste system. Why? Because the philosopher kings are the ones who have known things, and they can see stuff, and they read the lines. And yet, that's the plight of a philosopher king. Who wants to go back in the cave? Because we all know what it's like when we're trying to tell others what you witnessed in the cave or outside of the cave. What it's like when you've witnessed things, the thing in themselves, the noumenal experience of the imaginal phantasmagoric, the things that feel more real than reality itself. But the story must continue. And so you do just that because you remember you had a friend there. You had a friend there. There was a prisoner next to you. There were a few, and you want to go wake them up. And so you go back into the cave with the knowledge that you've just accrued from the wisdom of the forms, from philosophia, from the wise, from the good. Not from God, like the Abrahamic traditions want to teach them. That's not the Platonic God. That's an amalgamation of deities through time, the Abrahamic God. It's more of like, and what I mean by the Abrahamic God is obviously the God of the Old Testament is one God amongst many. In the Abrahamic traditions, you get a lot of tribes. The Old Testament is tribes warring against tribes. And which tribal God will win out? Yahweh, Jehovah, Belial, Moloch, El, all these translations of what that term God even means. And so, you have witnessed the Platonic God, the Pythagorean God. You've witnessed the God closest to the soul, the nous, which speaks through logos. The intellectual mind of God you have witnessed, and that is the Platonic forms. And from there, you go back in and you want to go tell your friend, hey, I think you can unshackle yourself. And I think we can get out of here. But strange enough, when you go back into the darkness, now you're actually like the darkness hurts you. You can't see clearly, and it's really strange. And you're trying to be like, hey, my vision is clouded. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why I can't see things the way I did once I was here in the cave before. And so obviously your friend's like, it's because you walked outside and you witnessed like insanity. I can't listen to you. You can't even see clearly. You can't even see that the shadows on the wall or the things. That's real. What are you talking about? That's all I've ever witnessed in my life. So you must be lying, obviously. Well, you're not lying. And you now being the philosopher king or being an awakened individual, somebody who has broken themselves free from the cave, from the matrix, from the island, right? There's all kinds of movies that are out there that are trying to talk about it. Some are corny, some are not. The Island is actually one of them that I've watched recently that actually is a great representation of what Plato is talking about in his allegory of the cave. But we can witness that in our own world. People, sophists, spewing truths given to them, paid truths. Hey, if you go read this thing to a bunch of people, you know what will happen? I'll give you money. Maybe I'll let you be unshackled. Maybe I'll let you be one of the people that carries all the objects to make those people think that those things on the wall are real. Interesting. Interesting reflection that the people that are carrying all of the stuff and just going upon their normal everyday existence in the cave that are unshackled, that think that they're better than the people that are the prisoners shackled to the wall, are just the people that were shackled to the wall that tried to get out of the cave, but didn't make it out of the cave, and they got paid by whoever mans the great fire. Something to think about, right? That's something to think about. But now you, since you were one who actually took the whole call to an adventure, instead of like halfway doing it, and then being like Cypher from the Matrix, and then being like, steak is just so much. I know this steak is not real. You know it's not real. But God, this steak is so good. Man, who doesn't want steak? And now it's like, instead of the steak, it's steak, fake meat. Lab-grown meat. It's going to be fine. Bill Gates says so. Don't you want lab-grown meat? Eat your lab-grown. What do you mean Beyond Burgers aren't good? You're crazy, man. Flatulence from cows is causing the disruption of climate change, right? You don't believe in climate change? The Great Fire. It's right there. It's speaking to me. Don't look behind the curtain. I am the Great Oz. Right? Interesting. Alice in Wonderland to the Wizard of Oz to the Matrix. It's almost like stories are trying to tell us something. And someone great once said that everything after Plato was just a remix. there hasn't been a great story since. Some have said that of the Iliad and the Odyssey, which then I think Plato was taking you a next step deeper into the mystery schools. And then from there, we've all just been trying to work out what the hell Plato was talking about. Because Plato and Aristotle were the ones who actually helped the rest of the world understand everything else. Chemistry, mathematics, astronomy, science of the Enlightenment period from Descartes on owes their gratitude to the exact things that they're trying to deconstruct and demolish. And yet they don't understand that's what they're doing. It's fascinating. From alchemy, we get chemistry. Alchemia, the great Egyptian mystery schools. But it wasn't just them, right? The mysteries of Eleusis, to the fields of, to the Orphic traditions, to Pythagoras' traditions. All these things are coming up. Why? Because human consciousness is trying to explore itself and try to understand itself. The call to adventure isn't something that is just a format of storytellers to copy so you could get this hero's journey. The hero's journey is within. The mythologies of old are our body and our organs trying to understand themselves because they speak their own language. The soul is there because it's part of the divine imaginal world, the divine logos, the divine intellect. These things are trying to speak through the material world. And so we can't fall prey to the idea, like some of the Gnostics wanted to believe, that materiality is evil. But Iamblichus came in, and he's a Neoplatonic thinker, but he did something different. And he said, no, actually, it's because of the soul has become embodied that evil can exist. And it's that contradiction, yet thing that is worked out through then the theurgy, or through certain practice, mystical and magical practices, that then you can refine yourself and you can become more divine than you are an animal. Because we are animals, but we are also divine. We have a birthright of both. And that is something that I think those in the cave are trying to hide from us. And so we must understand that, yes, even though in the cave, you've gone down there and now your vision has adjusted and now you can, but you still have the memories from the forms. So when tapping into the transmigration, the metempsychosis from your past life in the forms, right? I'm not speaking past lives in any other way, but from knowledge that you had prior to this life, Plato's theory of knowledge, his epistemology, his episteme, his ideas of things and truth are stemming from remembering. Anamnesis, right? If amnesis means forgetting, washing yourself in the river of Lethe, then washing yourself through the river of Nimson, and having this idea of anamnesis, or remembering. You are not learning anything, nor are you leering anything. But what you are is you are remembering. You're remembering the forms. You're remembering what it was like when you weren't in the cave, pre-birth in cave. And once you had that call to adventure and you walked out of the cave, when you go back into the cave, you can remember. It's the plight of the mystic, the plight of the individual, the plight of the outlaw and of the Luciferian spirit is, now that you have broken yourself free, you can't go back. And if you try to go back, you are what Plato would call be doing evil. Because you are now being ignorant of the knowledge of the forms that you remembered. So now you are doing evil. You are evil. And evil didn't have the same words. It wasn't the same kind of thing as we have today. But there is something to it that we must remember. That if you're going against the flow of the world, and then you are not burning off karma, You're not having your path, especially because you've already remembered, and now you have to make sure you are spreading truth. And you're not spreading truth if you're only within a narrative of what the cave is trying to represent, which is the shadows on the wall. Because the shadows on a wall are just like sense impressions. Sense impressions. It's your perspective of a sense impression. In the phenomenological way of thinking about it, you never truly experience anything in and of itself. So you can never truly experience objective truth, even though objective truth is there. But through working, having the alchemical experience, alchemizing yourself, because it's not all lost, there is a pathway in that call to adventure out into the forms. What you do is you understand that it is your nervous system that is interpreting the world in a certain way, the world of representation. And in that world of representation, as long as you remember that's what it's doing, it's only representing things. Now, if I work on my nervous system, brain, body perceiving apparatus, but it's not just a mechanical thing, it's an interaction of the soul in the world, and that's being in the world in the Heideggerian sense, not subject to perceiving an object, because in worldview, those two can never meet, which makes it good for being able to understand the mechanical nature of the functional world. It's great. Then we can break it down and we get all the fun toys that we have today. And yet what happens with the subjective experience? Then now everything is relative. And nothing really means anything. And if nothing even means anything, then anybody who has a slight understanding of what actually is going on, the real truth, or even a slight understanding of the forms, and then doesn't want to tell everybody else about that, they can hijack people's understanding of subjective truth, these small t's, because they have more of an inkling of big T truth, and understand that, no, actually you have this magic that's within you, this remembrance, and if you can tap into it, then you can take control of your own agency, and you can be a force for good, the good. And then through that, we can awaken everybody else within the cave and walk out of the cave. But remember, this is something really important, is you cannot take the sun, the fire, the light, back into the cave. You can only point people out of the cave into the light. That's something really important. And I think we get that with a lot of our mystical and esoteric religious traditions, right? Even Christ, when speaking to his flock, right? Speaking to his apostles, it says, to you I give the truth, but to you I give the word. To you I give the truth, but to all of those outside of here, I must speak an allegory and parable, because they are not ready to hear what I have just told you. I think it's very similar in Buddhism, right? In your Hindu traditions, in Taoism. And I think most religious traditions have this esoteric understanding of how to walk out of the cave, how to use your magic and your mysticism to take your will and train it to be so clear and single pointed that even as Boethius proved in his jail cell, that you can take everything from me, but you cannot take my divine spark in my mind, my soul. Only I can give up my soul. You cannot take it. And so it's fascinating at the world we live in today, because now here we are. Now here we are, and we are fooled that the things that are being told to us, those things must be true. Why would they lie to us? But yet those things, I want to let you all know, are nothing but caves, the shadows on the cave wall. Because you are in the cave right now. You're either in your man cave or your woman cave, or you're in your house or in a car. But no matter where you are in the cave. And so how do you get out of the cave? And that's what the hero's journey is here for. That's what the magical practices and the mystical schools and the mystical practices are. You set up a little space in your home and you shut off the TV and your computer. And maybe, just maybe, you turn on a nice song, right? Something that doesn't have any words, or something that has a nice cadence, like a shamanic drum, or any of the songs that do that for you. I have my own. And sometimes you just need to turn it off, because in the end, we must all just be silent. And it is in the silence which we can go within our own unconscious mind, in our own caves, and finally understand that those shadows on the wall aren't real. And then we can have a true mystery and a true mystical experience. Because maybe the term mystery comes from mystes, meaning behind closed eyes. And that is when we have that cutting off of all of our sense perceptions. And then we can finally witness things in themselves and have a contemplative thought or a reflective thought that isn't just given to us from the outside, but is actually coming from within. Because that is where true change comes from. It comes from within. Something that people parody and spout all the time. So go within or go out in nature like Socrates, right? Socrates did it. He walked out in nature and he spoke to the muses. Unplug, right? What did Leary state? Tune in, turn on, but this time don't drop out, drop in. The tune in and turn on is tune into your nervous system and turn on the higher circuits of the neurosomatic circuits through yoga, kung fu, through mystical and magical practices, meditation and chanting. And upon doing that, you can deconstruct and reconstruct your own nervous system. You can become your own meta-programmer. Because right now I'm telling you that there are people who are programming you, whether you like it or not. And so while being in the world, while being in the cave, why not be your own programmer? But first, go out of the cave, witness the forms, and understand what it's like to become the philosopher king, and do what Socrates did. And I don't mean drink hemlock, okay? Let's get that straight. He was able to do it because he was trying to prove a point, and he came to a position in his life where he's all like, you know what? I think this is good. I think I just got to do this. He was speaking to his higher genius, to his daemon. Daemon, meaning higher genius, something that he speaks about often, because he was tapped into that due to his initiations into the mysteries. Not everyone has those initiations, and so it's going to take time, because either you find a lodge or you find a school or you don't, and you just do it yourself, and then try to make sure you have mentors and teachers along your way that you can listen to. But first, understand you must become a critical thinker, and you must learn how to philosophize, which is why Socrates was teaching just that in the Republic. He was teaching people how to become philosophers. Instead of teaching them to go off into into a mystery school, which I'm telling you is dangerous in these days. People and gurus and higher-minded leaders trying to tell you what to do who may have not done the work themselves. That's how you get this new age community nonsense, woo-woo spiritual thing. And you get these all dude bros who are trying to sell you something at the same time as they go prove that they actually can't even handle their own lives. They're small adult children, these children adults out there. And so, like I said, become a philosopher king by experiencing the forms and remembering what your birthright is. And so how do we do that? This is everything that I've been saying in Magus and the media. It's fine, your call to adventure, what the hero's journey means to you. Go outside, touch some grass or snow. Don't listen to all the crazy narratives around you, because that is just what they are, shadows on a wall. There are true things, but you are going to have being or truth disclose itself to you. Truth is not an object, but it's a way of perceiving and experiencing reality, where reality then discloses and unconceals itself to you. Go buy The Republic. Read classical literature. Read Milton's Paradise Lost. Read the Iliad and read the Odyssey. They're going to try, those in the cave are going to try to tell you what the Odyssey means. It's coming out. Christopher Nolan is doing it, and I hope he truly understands what he's doing, because people are going to listen to him, and then that will be their Odyssey instead of the Homeric tradition and reading from the texts. Go to the texts, go to the thing themselves. It's going to be hard. You will never be able to truly touch the noumena besides having that ecstasis, that Gnostic experience, the true gnosis, the direct experience of the forms, which is every person's birthright. Read The Republic. Read great traditions. Read books because it's going out of style, and be a rebel. That's the new thing. Being rebellious means tapping into the intellectual side of your nervous system and the somatic. But balance it out and make sure that you're testing yourself, because it's hard reading those books, because they speaks in a way that makes you think about things. You're going to have to go up against your own nervous system, your own great demiurge. And so if you've ever wanted to carry a sword, let that be the sword of intellect. And if you wanted to come into contact with the great cup, have the cup of compassion. And when you're finally understanding what the pentacle is, this coin, understand that that is the earth that you walk on in the material universe. It is worth more than gold. And if you want to brandish the wand of the magician, tap into your intuition. And once you have all of these things balanced and in harmony, the world will right itself. And if enough of us do that, and then we can maybe, for a little bit, find the divine and live in a harmonious society. It won't last long, but we can make it last as long as possible. Thank you for listening tonight, this fine evening, this wonderful understanding as we are deep within the cave. Plato's allegory of the cave. I am appreciative to every single one of you out there. These understandings and these conversations of these things are so important, and they are not happening enough. Plato's allegory of the cave is something you can read over and over and over again. The greatest minds of our time and the times of past have read this work. Magic is real. The billionaires and those who don't even use money to get around are doing magic on a daily basis. And you should too. It's only you out there who is not doing it. And maybe you are, and maybe that's why you're listening. And I'm just here to then tell you, you're not alone. Step outside the fringes and try to understand yourself just a little deeper. Read The Allegory of the Cave. It will change your life. I highly recommend Alan Bloom's version. It is amazing. The Republic of Plato. I appreciate everyone out there. Please, if you haven't, go listen to my conversation with Ike Baker of Arcanum. He is brilliant, and his work is amazing. Etheric Magic is a book he just wrote, as well as right now he's writing a book on mythology. I just had a conversation with Scarlet Imprint, Peter Gray and Alkistis Demek. Those two are brilliant, and they have been as staples in our community, in the occult and magical community for such a long time. Their books are beautiful. Go over to their website. Go check it out. As well as everyone out there, just realize there are other great YouTubers out there that are doing this. Occult Rejects is an amazing place to go and check out all of your magic and mysticism and conspiracy. They're doing amazing work, and I come on there every once in a while when they ask me to, because I am a fellow reject, and I thank them so much for everything. And so you can find me over on the Occult Rejects. Please go check out my Instagram and my X account. This is Magus in the Media. I appreciate every single one of you. I will be bringing you more content. We'll be breaking down music. We'll be breaking down anime. film and literature and anything I can get my hands on. I appreciate every single one of you, and I wish you so much luck in the desert of the real.